always, Karl Hughes, your host here. And today my guest is Tevia Hoalst with TeKoda Accounting. Tevia, good to see you.
Thanks for having me, Carl. I'm excited to chat with you today.
Oh yeah, accounting is one of our favorite topics as entrepreneurs, right?
It's my favorite. I don't know if it's everybody else's, but
tell us a little bit about the business. Obviously, we've talked before, so I know a little bit of backstory, but give us the rundown. What do you guys do at TeKoda, and how did you get into this?
yeah, actually, that's a great intro because our kind of difference, I'll start from that in the company, is we actually try to kind of make what we're doing interesting and fun. Not that, I'm the first to admit numbers are never going to be anyone's most fun, but we bring ourselves to it. So we talk to our clients a lot. We really try to bring personality. We try to know our clients and what their goals are and actually be a human behind the computer. So that's usually helpful. But we do what we call internal accounting to the business. So anything that you need for daily, weekly, monthly function, that would be your bookkeeping, payroll, sales tax, paying bills, doing invoices, following up on invoices, any kind of financial reports that you need, we can produce. And then we go clear into, we'll do some kind of coaching. So setting your goals, doing your forecasting, budgeting, we do all of that. The singular thing we do not do for a very good reason is we do not file taxes. And that's because I am a business owner first. You'll hear that probably a few times today. It's where my mindset for the company comes. I am not a trained CPA. And I think that brings a lot of difference to the business and how we serve our customers. So we don't do tax because I want your CPA beholden to you directly. And I want your bookkeeping team beholden to you, the client, directly, because then we both kind of keep an eye on each other for your best interest. And I think that you get the best product from that. So that's what we do.
That's super interesting. It just immediately got me thinking, because one of the things I struggle with as an entrepreneur is realizing this is a very basic. Forgive all my observations here and questions because they're very basic. So one of the very basic things I learned early on in the business is like the way that you do your books for internal use and operating a business month to month can be very different from how a tax accountant looks at your books and what they care about. Let's talk about real quick some of those things. Again, I didn't realize this. My mind was blown realizing that a lot of companies, especially big ones, keep two sets of books for this. And it's a whole world to dive into. So tell me more about your understanding there.
Yeah. And actually, Carl, that's like a fantastic observation because when I do a consult and if I get asked, well, why don't I just have my CPA do it? Oftentimes, not always, but, there's some generalities that are fair. The tax CPAs are going to do books in what I liken to tax books. And the way that we do books are what I would call business books. They obviously are still appropriate for tax. The difference being, if you go look at your tax return that you've had in prior years, generally they're using anywhere, depending on the complication of your company, they're using about 5 to 8 categories that they put pretty much everything in. So when a tax accountant does your books, often they're not interested in you being able to do data analytics and reporting all year long to make your decisions. They're interested in the bottom finish line, which is, I just need really, really simple books to finish the tax return. That is not sufficient, in my opinion, as a business owner, to do analytics all year long and make really clear decisions based on your historical data. So we do the books in what I call business books, which is we expand that a little bit. It's very easy still for them to do the taxes off of, but we're going to give you enough data without being overwhelming that you can go in, or your team can come in with you, and you can make really good strategic decisions based on the data that you have because it's not overly truncated.
It makes me think of something here, and I'll kind of put a very concrete example of where I didn't understand this difference, and now I do. So my original bookkeeper was looking at our books through more of a tax lens, and they put all of our different payroll, like people we pay on payroll, into one big category of payroll expenses, right? And I looked at that and I'm like, okay, I guess that's the way you're supposed to do it. I don't know. I'm not a bookkeeper, right? But then I'm thinking like, but half these people are COGS, cost of goods sold. So they're in a different category of like, from an operational, like running the business perspective, than the people who are doing sales and marketing and like administrative overhead stuff. And I was like talking to the bookkeeper. I'm like, I don't understand. How am I supposed to tell like where this stuff is? And then they're like telling me, oh, well, we basically just have to add more categories. But Karl, you have to direct us how to do that. And I'm like, oh, this is a lot of work. It's like,
No.
I'm realizing, no, obviously, like, that's one of these things where I think if you get a less experienced bookkeeper who's not used to working with small business, or maybe they're only looking at it from a tax lens, you run into those kind of issues where they just say like, well, great, we'll fill it out with standard 5 categories for taxes, not the 20 that I actually want to see, or like divide them up the way I want to see it. And that's a super important distinction.
Yes. And I would say too, keep in mind when you're interviewing whomever is going to be the right, fit for you, see what their experience is. Because if they did come from a CPA office, they might have like technically, the right background, but the way they do it might be different than what you need. And for us, we really pay attention when we hire because, our team works on multiple files throughout the month. So we've actually found that we might find someone with really great experience, but if they've only worked in a singular company, sometimes they have a really hard time pivoting to focusing on multiple different industries. And sometimes in the same day, you have to pivot and think about a different industry. And that doesn't always cross over. So these are kind of things you can look at if you're looking to hire either an employee or a consultant in our industry.
Yeah, totally. That's really a good observation. I've also found a challenge with working with accountants who are used to bigger companies. So I've gotten a couple recommendations for accountants, both on the tax and bookkeeping side, who were used to working at like large, maybe not Fortune 500, but at least mid-sized companies that have dozens or hundreds of employees. And the things that you have to care about at hundreds of employees are just very different than the things you care about at 5 to 10. And there's a certain level of a detail that I might not care about that somebody at a bigger company might. And then on the other hand, there's some details I do care about that they may not care about because they're big enough to aggregate it and just let it come out in the wash. And I think it's really important to know that your bookkeeper and your accountants and anybody on that side understand real small business. You know what I mean? Like the real 5-10 person companies that we are today.
Yeah. I always tell people when I'm talking to them, get accounting, whether it's really tax or bookkeeping, is 80% either GAAP accounting or, tax code. And the remainder of that is what's so important. That last 20% is specific to your industry, specific to your tax entity. If you're an LLC or an S Corp, there's going to be different things about your books and your taxes that people need to be informed of. And so finding a partner, again, whether it's an employer, an outsourced consultant that understands your tax entity, understands your industry, so they get that last 20% just super right for you, is going to be your best outcome. And they should be able to also bring to the table a lot of information. We try to be very proactive. We often have multiple companies in the same industries, and that's actually so beneficial for our clients because we don't just see one company all the time. We see how maybe 20 companies work within the same industry, what softwares they use, what efficiencies they have. And so we can go to a different client that maybe is struggling with some process or efficiencies and say, hey, over here, this works really good for them. You might be interested in that information, or these guys are just turning out better profits and they're doing these different things. And of course, we don't share confidential information, but we do have knowledge that we proactively give, and you want your partners to be doing that.
Yeah. Looking at comparable businesses or having access to professionals who look at comparable businesses is extremely helpful in running your own business well. I found that a couple of years ago, I started looking into buying another business. And so I own one agency and I'm looking at these other companies to buy. And it became very clear what my deficiencies were in my current company when I'm looking at the way some of these people run way better, in certain ways. And then others were way worse in other ways. But it just I wouldn't have had any frame of reference without actually going in and getting to look at their books. And that's a really unique experience. And so if your accountant, your bookkeeper can give you those observations, that's a great way to tap into their knowledge and not have to go out there and look at balance sheets all day.
Yeah, I just told someone the other day, the only industry so far, well, not only, but one of them that we don't have that I haven't seen the back end of is like car sales. And I'm obsessed with sourcing. I just like want a hack to life, right? I'm obsessed with sourcing any kind of industry that I need to do things in my life so that I like understand the full picture. And I'm like, okay, how do I fully leverage being like a buyer in this industry?
Oh, I
Because
love that.
I
Yeah.
understand the back end. So
What's an industry like that? I love that. I think that's super interesting. I actually this reminds me of this is totally we're getting off topic and I'll bring us in
sorry.
someday. But no, it's all good. I'm super curious about this because I worked in some of my first jobs were in the restaurant industry, and I got up to like in college like being a kind of a low level manager, but I had enough insight because I was friends with the owner and friendly with the bigger managers to like understand the basics of the economics. And they knew I was studying engineering and business, and I'd be a geek for that stuff. So I'd get to look at the books and the way that monthlies were handled. And I thought it was really cool. But man, that's a tough business. You look at it on paper, and I look at it versus other ones, especially in technology, and like margins just razor thin, and like the people costs are huge and very variable. And like anyway, so it was really interesting to compare and contrast there. So my question over to you is, what's a business or an industry that you've looked at recently that you were like, oh, that makes sense why this thing is so tough or easy or whatever it is?
I'll give you actually kind of a funny one that just came to mind because I just did it. Because we get to see the back end of so many, and a restaurant is a great example because they do, I mean, be nice to your restaurant owners because it's very hard to make money, unless you're a big chain, and with a lot of brand recognition, but I just had a facial of all things, and I am so plugged in all of the time to the numbers and the back end. It's just what I do now that I'm supposed to be relaxing, right? And I'm sitting there like thinking to myself, okay, what are the costs here associated, the equipment and the people and the, what level of pay is this kind of person, and what is the cost that I paid for it, and what is the margin, and I love trying to figure that out. But it makes me a really tough buyer sometimes because if I know it's an industry with like really good margins, sometimes I'm kind of like I don't want to pay that, but I'll give you one other quick one. So I'm not from Idaho, but I lived in Idaho for many years, and they just opened, I think, the nation's largest grocery store. It's an Albertsons, and which was just bought by Kroger, I think. But anyway, you go in and it's this massive monstrosity. It even has, you can carry alcohol around because it has a bar on the side and whatever. Anyway, when it first opened, because of this brain I have in margin and waste, and I came out of the restaurants as well, I sometimes can't filter myself, and I'm going through and I'm seeing all of the vegetables and all the fruit and just so much, so much. And I'm like, nobody can consume all this before it's gone, right? So my husband teases me to this day because we go through the checkout. And of course, I'm asking the totally wrong person. We go through the checkout line, and I just asked the lady, it's like their opening weekend. I'm like, what are they doing with all their waste? Like, where is all this going? Because I know that this is not all being purchased. And sometimes I know that stores, because I've seen their balance sheets, unfortunately, they kind of don't want the stigma of how much waste there is. So instead of like doing really great donations that they could, sometimes they'll just kind of get rid of it, and they don't want people to see the waste. And I'm not saying that's what happened here. I don't know the answer, but my husband to this day, the lady just stared at me. It was a cashier. She
Right.
did
She's like,
not
what are you
know the
talking about?
answer.
Like,
Yeah. And so my husband all the time will ask me, what do you do with your waste? And I'm just like, I need to know the answers.
it's hard being a curious person. It is, Tevia.
Yes, it's very hard. Life is hard.
Right. Okay, so let's get back into your business a little bit. What does the typical customer look like? Is it usually small businesses, small service businesses, or there's certain industries, a certain size of like by number of employees? Like what's kind of typical, quote unquote?
Yeah, I'd say we have a pretty wide range, and then I'll dive into typical. So we can help anywhere from a startup business all the way to we have double digits in the multiples of millions, where we literally do daily accounting for them, and we're their outsourced accounting function. Generally, I'd say our sweet spot that we help companies is anywhere from like 1 to 10 million. They maybe have a handful of employees to 20, 30 employees. and we'll do our most normal space is we're doing like weekly work for them. We might be paying bills, sending invoices, and then doing the cash accounting, of course. So that's kind of our stretch in there. And then industry wide, we try to make sure we cover a lot of industries. Going back to what I said before, we want to be very knowledgeable about that 20%. So when we come into industries that we don't have people with background, we'll go looking for more employees that like fit that, what we're looking for. So we work all by referral. And so we don't niche deep into like a specific industry, but we end up very deep from referrals, but we're all over the board. We have about 60 different industries at this point that we cover. So I get lots of information.
Yeah, that's cool. So what is the trigger event where, and 1 to 10 million, I assume typically it's going to be like a C-level, entrepreneur or owner or somebody right next to them who comes to you. What's the trigger event though that gets them to come to you or to ask for that referral that ends up leading to you? Is it like I've been doing this myself and I'm just burned, I can't do this anymore? Is it like I've kind of outgrown my bookkeeper? Is it their bookkeeper just up and retired? Like, are there a couple scenarios there?
Yeah, I'd say less often it's still the owner trying to do it, but more often it is I either had someone that was a family member or an employee, or they're, whether it was an employee or an outsourced person, they either realized a problem or that person is moving out. We've had scenarios where they're just kind of breaking up with their service provider, whether it was the provider or themselves making that call. So it's usually a change internally where they need something different. And so I'll go in, I actually do an evaluation on the financials. I will point out whether they work with us or not, any issues they might have so that they kind of have a checklist to start with of like, okay, I need to get these sorted out before I go to tax. And then we kind of go from there.
So one of the things I've found really fascinating, one of the companies I own is a podcast production company, and we do audits with people. And so I get to see lots of podcasts or hear lots of podcasts. And what's cool about that is, you see several a month and you compare them to your own clients and you see a lot of the back end data and stuff. As you start to develop, I start to develop patterns of like just the most common issues, but also just like pitfalls that people fall into. So I'm curious to flip that question to you, Tevia, is what are some of the common issues you see in the what are the poorly run businesses doing that the best run businesses aren't, or vice versa? Like what do we do to kind of move into that top 10%?
Yes, this is awesome to be asking. So a couple of things. Number one is actually, you'd think the most obvious, but it's the most prevalent, is you may have your books being done or you don't, but in either scenario, they're not actually using the numbers. And that's the big, I would say there is the most profit lost in potential of not using your historical data to plan. It will be for the go forward, because I'm a visionary. I want to plan forward. And the way that I do that is I say, well, what have we done and what are we capable of doing going forward? Meaning, for instance, like a company that needs to buy a piece of equipment or hire a new person. That's a big question I get a lot is, can I afford to hire? And your own data will tell you that answer every single time. It will tell you the answer. It will tell you the timeline. And there's a lot of stress is another point I would point to in ownership that can actually be alleviated by having, number one, good quality books that you can trust to do planning off of, and actually doing planning and forecasting. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And
why do entrepreneurs, I'm going to pause you because I'm super curious. Like, why do entrepreneurs resist that? Is it wishful thinking? Are they thinking, well, I know the last 6 months says I've done this, but like I have this new plan and we're going to double next 6 months. So like throw all that out, like ignore the data. Let's just pretend live in, dreamland. Or is it something different that I'm missing?
No, I actually think so. There's a program called EOS that they talk about, your visionary and your integrator. And I'll answer it in this way. In my team, I'm the visionary, so I'm the forward thinker. I'm the planner of where we're going. And I have my integrator. She's a phenomenal COO, and she works in strategy process. I think, and I kind of know this answer because it's me, I even struggle with it. I don't want to look backwards. I want to go forward all the time. And I think that other entrepreneurs generally have that visionary forward mindset and they see the financials as backwards. And if they can marry, if you'll spend just enough time in there to well inform your forward plan to the best success, there's a really good, success point in there that you can reach if you'll just give it a little bit of time. But it's boring. It's looking back. It's, we already did that, like, I get it.
I've also noticed too, maybe this is a contributing factor, is that some people just tend to be less analytical in the way that they approach problems and solving problems anyway. And again, you can be successful without being super analytical. I don't think that's like a key, like you have to be the most analytical kind of like, math and data oriented person. But I think a lot of entrepreneurs, especially as you get to this like certain stage, they've been running the business off of a lot of gut feel and they've done fairly well with that, but that sort of only takes you so far. And at some point you need to either be the analyst. Sorry, I'm going to mix up my words here. You either need to be the analyst or you need to go hire somebody who's the analyst or partner with somebody who can kind of guide you there. Because I agree. I think some entrepreneurs live in dreamland almost too much. Like we got to be there most of the time because that's the only reason we keep doing this, right? Like it's good to have that visionary driving it forward, but like you can't ignore the past. You can't ignore the data that tells you where things really are.
Well, and I think you said it perfect. All of us really have an innate trust of our gut because we had to start from somewhere and we had to get somewhere. And there's a lot of confidence that goes into that. And I am the same way. But you said it perfect. There's a point where that's actually a hindrance because you just need a little bit more process towards the success. And, I point that out in data all the time of you don't see the leakage that's happening when you're just, pointing and shooting. So you got to have just a little bit more.
100% get that. I am the visionary in my companies too. And it is great to be partnered with and have people on the teams who are integrators. And they often will see when I'm living in vision land too much on a project, and they'll just take it from me and they just tell me, Karl, this is done being your project. This needs to go to the team that we don't use EOS, but we use similar kinds of systems. And like, it is very helpful to have that. Okay. So we hit on one big issue where people have their books, but they're not really using them to actively plan. What are some other common issues you see that like entrepreneurs can start to address?
Yeah, I'd say another one would be, depending on your industry, finance is probably across the board the number one that I see that kind of gets ignored. And so separate from just utilizing the data, it would be acknowledging that you need some help there. Kind of the old adage of like, what you plan for is what happens. And when you don't make a plan, when you don't have someone organizing it, that's still a plan. It's just not your best plan for success. So that's a very close number two is just like, oh, later, or purposely kind of avoiding it because it's not my forte. That is your number one red flag. You need to get someone that it is their forte, either employee or consultant, team with them, just like kind of what you were saying with the integrator. Let them do their thing, you do your thing, and you're going to be better off. So not even having the support in some way at all is the other big one that I see.
Yeah, I totally see that too. And I think it's a lot of us as entrepreneurs, we come at it from a sales perspective, almost where we just kind of are blind to all things except sales because revenue is what drove us so far. Like, the answer to all problems is more sales. It's very easy to fall back on that. But what I've noticed is, and I think it's partly too because of the size of companies you work with and the people I talk to most of the time too, is like they're kind of under the radar of what I will call the MBA crowd, the professional operators with like deep finance backgrounds and who understand some of the like more complex financial terminology around leverage and just like projections and things like that. Now, again, none of that stuff is magic and that hard to understand, but like those of us who are self-taught, like myself and probably you and most entrepreneurs like listening to this, we don't necessarily have the depth of knowledge and appreciation and understanding of how like that stuff works for the business. But like at a certain point, you hit 10, 20, $30 million in revenue, and you're going to start getting calls from private equity companies that want to buy you that are going to look at those things. And they're going to see a lot of opportunities in the small businesses that haven't been running in a financially sound way, but still managed to get this big. And that's where they kind of tend to come in, is like right around that threshold. So my guess is part of the reason we see such limited sophistication in the finance side is just like, we're too small. Like we don't, the real finance pros wait till we get bigger and then they come in and, do that. But I think to your point though, to get ahead as an entrepreneur, you want every advantage you can. And if you can understand some of the basics of how finance works and understand projections beyond just like, do I have cash in the bank? That is huge for making yourself more, I'll call it dangerous, but effective essentially.
Sure. Well, and I think I'll give you one other quick one that has to do with cash flow, similar to what you were saying, is I think what a lot of really successful entrepreneurs, problem that they don't see coming, that we end up like kind of usually helping them through, is it takes money to grow, similar to what you're saying. But even on a lower level, one of my favorite clients comes to mind, super, super successful entrepreneur, but the problem is they have to do a lot of their sales on terms, on invoice, which a lot of companies do. And some of their vendor bills, come due even before they have collection of all the funds. And there is a cash cycle crunch there with growth. And so they want to reach these really great growth, and they have the clients to do it, but they have to sort out the cash cycle. And so having the answer for that before you get there is so imperative. And getting over that and figuring out how to deal with that, when you have big payrolls, you've got 20, 30 people on your payroll, and you've got to hit those dates before you have other invoices. There's some strategy there that really helps if you have that figured out ahead of time.
Oh, that's huge, Tevia. I'm glad you brought that up too, because I have a little quick story on that. Like when I was about a year and a half into draft.dev, it was growing really quickly, which you typically think of as being a good thing when you own a small business. And so it went from $50,000 in revenue the first year where I was doing it part-time to $1 million in revenue the second full year. And I thought I was so smart and all this, but I had it didn't realize this at the time, but in hindsight now I see this. I had a negative cash cycle, meaning I would sign contracts. I would have to hire people to start executing the work. Then the client would pay me 30 to 90 days after we had started paying our contractors to actually fulfill the work. So I'm growing and simultaneously losing cash in the bank at the same time. And I'm like, what is wrong? What the hell's wrong with me? Like, what did I do here? And it wasn't until, again, I talked to smart people and got some of this sorted out. I realized, oh, you need things. If you're going to have a negative cash cycle, you need a line of credit. If you're going to have a negative cash cycle, you can try to do things, incentivize, like pushing that cash forward or getting a piece of it forward. And we did a bunch of stuff like that. And it completely changed the optionality that we had as we got that sorted out over the course of 6 months. It takes time. It's not an overnight thing. But it was a little scary because I did not have a reserve of cash to pay these people. I got down to like I'm like calling the bank, begging for a line of credit at like, very low balance. And they're like, well, why are we going to give you a line of credit? You got no cash in there. They don't know the contracts coming in. They don't know the sales volume coming in. Anyway, so just a really good one. It sounds so boring, but it's so important. And I'm so glad that I went through it and it didn't kill me, but also that I learned from that, because that was a huge learning.
Yeah. Well, and I would add to that, there's a lot of owners out there that rightfully, are quite frugal. And they think, oh, well, I'm either not going to sell or I'm not going to, grow or take equity. And so they might be in a really strong position, and they haven't done those things and pulled those levers. And the problem is, when you're really healthy is when you do need to go get backup funds, because someone will lend to you if that's the answer, that's right for you. When you do go ahead and hit that growth spur and you weren't expecting that cash flow cycle, you may get turned down. So you kind of have to do it when you don't need it, so that it's just there. So that's a good plan. And cash flow planning for reserves is probably the best way to do that if you can, just because you are going to pay some interest on that line of credit and it may be worth it, but it's just something to take into account of the planning, because it does cut into the net profit margin at the end. So
yeah, our specific solution was basically give people the the ticket price if they pay up front at the beginning of the engagement. If they want to pay over time and on a negative cycle, we just charge them an interest rate, which allowed us to borrow the money to essentially fund it. So there's, yeah, I mean, again, took a year and a half of getting things sorted out and screwing it up to finally figure that out. But that's the way, it goes if you don't get help. Okay, so Tevia, what's hard about running this business? Because it sounds, I mean, again, there's a lot of obvious things that to me that are helpful about having a good partner around bookkeeping. And so to me, it's like any small business needs this. Like everybody should be coming to people like you who are good at this. On the other hand, like, you're just hiring bookkeepers and you just make sure they have some industry experience. Sounds easy, right? Like what's hard about it? And what are the secret things under the hood? Because I love to dig into that stuff.
Yeah, a couple of things. One, just like anybody else, keeping up with the growth. We are incredibly picky about our team. We call our team our unicorns. We go through extensive testing and, experience and interviews to get them. So I feel very fortunate for our clients that they definitely have the best of the best. So those people are hard to find. They usually already have a job, so it's kind of hard to go find them because they're not necessarily looking. So that's definitely one, is keeping up with that growth. Another one would just say getting our name out there. Is we do it different. We do, if you're looking for actual service, if you're someone who values customer service like I do, we're aiming for that. And so letting people know we're out there and we're happy to help them is probably the other challenge. I know you and I had a conversation about marketing and what works for service businesses. And, for us, it's just been getting out there and letting people know that we're there and we're trustworthy and we're going to do what we say we're going to do.
Right. Yeah. I mean, referrals, and every service business I've ever talked to, referrals is the basic lifeblood. It's at least 50% of everybody's, deal flow. Not everybody's, but a lot of people's deal flow. And then there's that other 50%, which varies quite a lot depending on the company and the owner and the type of business or whatever. Tell me, let's talk more about getting the word out. Like what kind of things have you tried? You mentioned like up to now, it's been mostly referrals. What kind of things are you either actively trying or thinking about or have tried in the past? And like what's worked or not worked? Any observations there?
Yes. So things that have worked is from day one. I mean, I've been a big networker. I'm the typical entrepreneur. I still handle sales and I love to engage with the clients. So just getting out, I attend conferences now. I speak at conferences. I'll do the speed networking, if they have it at a conference or whatever. All that stuff works really well. And better than that, though, I would say getting in front of people multiple times, right? Building relation over time is really where it's at for us. What has
because it's a high trust sale. I mean, like, right? Like, you have to kind of go back to your point. Like, nobody's going to go pick, especially if you got burned by your last bookkeeper. You don't want to just go pick the next first bookkeeper you find. Like, it's got to be like, I believe Tevia can do this. I believe her team is great. I believe she is a honest person. Otherwise, yeah, it's not going to happen.
Yes. Yeah. It's all about the genuine care and delivery. I mean, I've always said, I don't actually think entrepreneurship is that hard. If you find something that people need and you actually pick up your phone or your email and you deliver what you say you're going to deliver, shocker, there's going to be clients, but I don't know. That doesn't seem to be the norm anymore. Anyway, what hasn't worked for us? So we actually this was the first year in our financial cycle that we committed to actually a big marketing push. And we tried to go off of just not having referrals and have an organic marketing pipeline, a paid pipeline. And, back to its trust building, it's a longer cycle for us. The paid marketing, we just didn't find that it worked. Maybe we weren't niching down enough, as we've talked about before, but I think it's just all about, it's not the place. Cold leads are a really hard way to build trust, I think, quickly.
I mean, look, we've had some success with cold outreach. We've had some success with organic search. I've never had any success with paid ads personally. So, but I know other agency owners who have. So like all these things are possibly viable, but there's so many variables that make it hard to like say that it worked for agency A, therefore it'll work for B, C, and D. I think it's all about finding your own journey. And then part of it too is just like with a business as small as either of ours, honestly, it's like, what do you have the mental and time energy to go do and maintain? Because you're going to be involved in it, right, Tevye? I mean, like when there's a marketing or sales effort, I'm going to be involved. Even if I'm not doing every action, I'm going to be overseeing every action. So like if I don't like it and I'm sick of it and bored of it, like it's not going to happen.
Yep. I have made much more content in the last year of my life than I have ever wanted to in my entire life. It's not my favorite thing to do, but it is our position. So I end the struggles, that in business that you were asking about with exactly that. I think there is still a little bit of a bottleneck, even at where we are in our growth, of how do we leverage something other than just getting out and building trust person to person, because, that's me, that's maybe one salesperson. That's a really hard way to grow slow, which I will be the first to say, like you alluded to earlier, slow growth is a great way to go because you can manage that cash flow cycle. But as most of us entrepreneurs, we like to see a skyrocket and we like a challenge. So, it's not always fun to grow at a snail's pace, but it is very stable to do it that way.
The nice thing too about your type of business is that a lot of it's going to be recurring. Like, the turnover, I imagine people are not trying to go change their bookkeeper every year or two. It's a big bear. Even if they don't love your service, it's hard to get off of it. I don't mean they don't. I'm sure every client does, but I just know that that's one of those sticky things. Like I've had this discussion in the past with a bookkeeper I didn't love, but I was like, well, yeah, but I don't want to go find another one right now. And they're not killing us. So like, we'll just survive another year with it. Not a great place for them to be, but also it's like, it's hard to change. Anyway. Okay. So Tevye, let's talk about the other one, hiring, because this is one that obviously an issue every service-based business has, because at least half of our costs are going to be people. Is my guess how your business runs and how mine run. You mentioned you guys have a pretty rigorous process around like finding good people. Walk me through that at a high level and give me, whatever secret sauce you can share. Obviously, you can keep whatever you want to yourself, but I'm always curious how other people go through this, because I've tried many different iterations of hiring.
Yeah, I'm an open book, so no worries there. I will help anybody be successful. So a couple of things. We are incredibly culture driven. It's the reason we keep our team, because we don't want to work so hard to find these great people and then, have them be unhappy and leave. So the first and foremost interview we do, it's a little unusual, is actually a culture interview. So we have on our quite small team, we have a culture manager that manages the team having connection and us just doing our best by our clients. And she holds an interview with people that so I guess I should back up a step. How they get in, of course, we do a posting, but we use a personality profiler called Culture Index, and every application has to go through Culture Index. And through that, we find specific profiles that tend to be more successful in the work that we do. So they do have to come through that filter and be that specific profile. And then our culture manager speaks to them. They don't even do a skills assessment yet. It's all about, are you going to enhance our culture? Are you going to buy into our culture? Because we do not want that dragged down. That's our secret sauce, is our culture. And then we actually do a lot of learning from prior hiring. And every time we move someone out for a different reason, we kind of do a debrief about, okay, what worked, what didn't. And where it comes to the skills, if we did move them out because maybe they were making mistakes or something, these were more early days, we would document, okay, well, what were the missing things? What were the problems? And we actually bring that into the new skill sets to make sure that we're covering, at least that we're not repeating old mistakes,
Yeah. I love that feedback loop. That's a great idea.
Yeah. So there's always a debrief and, what could have we done better? What did we miss in the interviewing initially? And we just constantly, we do use top grading for our interviewing. So that's a really good tool to pull out things in the interview in a legal way that would be conflicts. And then the skills assessment is always live. So we give them a file, that is just a dummy file that we know we have, problems in there that we want them to solve and find, and they have to live show us their skills. And they might go through a couple of those, and then we, figure out who's going to make the cut. So
yeah, I love there was a book I read a few years ago called Recruit Rock Stars, and one of the things I took away from that one was basically giving people an experience that is as close to the day-to-day job as possible, and either working through it with them or seeing them do it, observing them do it, or making them, accountable for a deliverable, and how much you learn in that. I mean, you learn so much, and it's not just the technical skills that you learn that they have. You also learn, like, how do they think about solving a problem? Or which things do they elevate to me to ask a question around versus just kind of go figure out on their own? How do they go figure stuff out on their own? Like, there's so many little things you kind of like look for there that are really interesting. I find that very fascinating.
I'm gonna read that book. So I'll take that. Yes, I wanted to give you one additional that you said that's really important in our process. So I give full credit to my partner COO. She actually structures every new hire. Their first 1 to 2 weeks is because our people work remote, right? So they have a lot of freedom in their day. She completely structures their first couple of weeks, and it's a lot of shadowing of like people that do the same job. It's a lot of like, okay, go try this. Now come ask what questions you have. And then she kind of tapers them off to like their own free time later. So I think the combination of that to set them up for success, we've gotten a lot of feedback. We ask for 30, 60, 90-day feedback on new hires. And all of them with that process have said they felt very supported and they didn't feel like left out in the weeds. So I think that is a big one that people could duplicate.
What is top grading? I feel like I should know that term because you just went right into it, and then I don't. So I assume other people listening will. But give me the rundown. What is top grading?
Yes, it's a book that's like this thick. It's huge. And it gives you for every kind of scenario you could want to go through and hire, whether it being skills or personality things. It actually gives you really in-depth, great questions that you can go through and ask. So a lot of people that use it, they have like their 5 to 10 that they like to ask all the time. But what it's really good for is say you've done one interview and you come out and you're like, there's these couple of things in their experience or something that I want to dig into more. But of course, we have to do it in a certain way. And so you can go to the book, to the sections that are applicable, and you can find specific questions that will help you dig out, like, is this a team player or are they going to be difficult on the team or things like that. And so it's a phenomenal resource. Anyone who does hiring should have a copy of this book in their bookshelf.
That's great. Thank you for that. That sounds right up my alley because I'm a very procedural, love to have the sort of textbook to go back on person. So let's talk a bit about I guess like I'll call this managing your own psychology as an entrepreneur. You've been at this for a few years now, and so I'm only 4 years into being a full-time entrepreneur. So I'm always trying to learn, how do I like manage the highs and lows, right? Give me an example of like what you felt throughout this, and maybe like how you've managed some of the low spots or the high spots, and like what do you do to keep yourself sane as an entrepreneur, for lack of a better word?
I would say in the low spots, I mean, I'm a pretty like positive personality as it is. So I'm lucky I don't have as much of that as most, but I think it's all about your community, really. At the end of the day, like, do you have a support system? And be it a group of friends, be it a really good family, around you, or hopefully, a really good business network is so imperative. Because sometimes, in my case, certainly your family and your friends may not speak your business language. And so that can feel very lonely. And when you're on those lows, you feel like you're a man alone. And what I have done that has been phenomenal for myself in those scenarios is years ago, I joined a business. It's not networking. It's a support group, essentially, an education group called Entrepreneurs Organization. And they team you up with, you can interview different forums, and they go from like 6 to 9 entrepreneurs, and they can range, in industries. And it's essentially your own little like melting pot of support. And they call it, I think they've changed the name now, so I'm going to butcher, I'm going to get in trouble, but they call it Gestalt, where you never give advice, because their whole thing is entrepreneurs are so independent and trust their instincts. They don't really want advice from other people. So you come and you say, maybe I'm having this challenge with my partner or my employees, and your group of knowledgeable business owners will come and say, oh, I've had a similar experience and this is how I handled it. And then it's up to you if that seems relevant for what you need or not. And that has been imperative. So I would say somehow finding community for those low times is everything.
Totally. Yeah. That's one of the first things I did when the business started to take off was join the EO Accelerator program here in Chicago. And then I've been in EO for a couple of years now. Yeah, love it. Same. I'm 100% with you on that. I think having some kind of community like that where you can get really vulnerable. And this is the part I'll add here is that, like, unlike a lot of general business networking or even like support groups, EO forces you, because you get the same group of people every month for years. It forces you to get really deep, and the exercises they have you do are about, like, very much like getting in touch with your emotions around issues, not just the surface level of the issue. And so that is something, and I just was listening to something, a podcast talking about this, like something that is just missing from a lot of people's day-to-day lives in this increasingly social media remote world, is like that deep connection where you get really vulnerable with other humans, because we build connection so much faster and stronger when we can get in person and see each other face to face. It's easier to get vulnerable, but we just don't do as much of that anymore, especially those of us working remotely. And so anyway, long story short, you need some way to go get deep with other people. And ideally, I think I agree with you, Tevia, somebody who understands the language of a small business owner, so EO is great if you're in that 1 to 20 million probably in revenue stage. Like, that's typically the people in there. There's other groups for bigger companies. There's other kind of support networks for smaller companies. There are competitors to EO, of course, but like anything like that, I totally agree. That's that got me through a lot in the last couple of years. Yeah. Let's talk about real quick. I always like to ask people about books because I'm a big reader. You already mentioned top grading, so I've already got one. Any books you've been reading lately that have been an impact on the business or on how you live your life around the business?
I'd give a couple. So one specific to finance that is like, I would call it the finance Bible. It's phenomenal. It's by a CPA that's in EO, actually. His name is Greg Crabtree, and it's called Simple Numbers. And it is what it says. It's very easy to follow. It's very easy to understand. He really did it in entrepreneur speak instead of, IRS speak. And we structure our books that way. And you have like labor utilization. You were kind of speaking to that earlier, so that you have your operational labor and your actual like direct labor, things like that. Really imperative. Any of our clients, we work with them to try to structure them in that way, because it's really is what it says. It's very simple. And then because I have it sitting here, I will show you. Very early on, I read this book and I really found it great for supporting our culture. It's called Awesomely Simple by John Spence. I was touching up on it, so I have it right here on my desk. And that one was a different one I haven't heard people mention before, but I actually found it quite impactful. But we really focus on our culture a lot. So that one, if you're interested in culture, that's a great one to read as well.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for that, Tevia. I don't read as much as I used to before having kids, but I still try to get through a couple books a month if I can. So I've got this ever-growing list. I'm never going to get to them all, but it's always nice to have options. The other thing you mentioned before we were recording, and I do want to touch on this because of personal curiosity, even if listeners have drowned off by then. I am super curious about, you're working with a speech coach. Tell me more about that. Are you, give me your kind of like thought behind it. What do you want to get out of that, and how's it going? And just maybe generally what inspired you to go that way?
Well, it had to do with exactly what we were talking about before is, I'm the face of the company, which I'm happy to be, but I'm going to do it to the best of my ability. So I am out speaking. I'm on podcasts a lot, just getting our name out there and saying, hey, we're a different option from the status quo. So because I'm doing that, I want to be very mindful that I'm doing it to the best of my ability. I do love to learn and grow. So I went out into my EO, community and said, who do you guys like? And I had a gal referred to me. She's actually a trained actress, and she has pivoted that into helping with speech and just emotive speech speech and connecting with an audience. And it's been really fun. And I really love it for the reason that I was saying before, that I can send her, like, I'll finish this podcast and I'll send it to her and she will come back with feedback for me. And it's really fun to get that because it feels like a really good use of time, because I'll get feedback on it. And, all the things you've picked out, listeners, that has been terrible in here, I'll work on for future.
Well, I think average listeners don't notice most of the things. I mean, I interview a fair number of people and I talk to a fair number of people. You seem to be fairly personable and able to do this a lot more confidently than some people. So I think you probably have some natural ability that you're then also pushing, you're pushing yourself further, as you're probably going to get even better. But it's hard to get feedback when you have you're a naturally pretty good speaker. So I struggle with it. I sound like a jackass that I'm like saying I'm great at something, but like I'm a good speaker. I've always spoken at conferences and meetups. Like I'm the one who raises his hand to say, yeah, I'll give the talk. Like I don't have any problem with it. I'm not afraid of it like a lot of people. That said, I have a hard time getting feedback because the average person is like, dude, you look like you killed it. And I'm like, well, yeah, but I feel like I could be better because I haven't done this that long. I can't be that good. You know what I mean? And so I've always struggled with like getting a little bit of like specific and actionable feedback from someone who's a tier better, because I think I tend to not be as worried about as a lot of people, which is usually people just want to get on stage for one time ever. And that's like the end of it, So anyway, I think that's a really good call. I love the other thing I'll just add there and say, like, this is a cool trait that you have, is just the interest in like advancing yourself. Even though you've got a fairly good little business, you've got like a team, you could certainly just, sit back and chill or just keep doing what you're doing. But you're kind of like, how can I get 10% better at something, 5% better at something? So good for you. Yeah, I love that mindset.
Thank you. Yeah, it goes back to the beginning. I am endlessly curious. So I'm going to research and do all the things.
So this is the last question. I swear, I always like to ask this because I do like to check in with people. If I check back in with you in a year, Tevia, what do you hope to have accomplished? What do you hope's better or changed in your business or your personal life, whatever you're working on right now?
Yes, I love this question. Okay, so I'm very interested right now in getting into growth by acquisition. I mentioned earlier we're looking for more pipelines than just referrals. And we've talked a little bit about this pre-interview, but I'll speak a little bit to it because it might interest other people. I've heard a stat recently that 90% of businesses up for sale go unsold. And although that might be the case in a lot of other industries, accounting is kind of its own beast where not enough people are going into it. And so there's a lot of demand and there's a lot of mid-tier firms that are doing acquisitions, trying to grow that way. And so it's been an interesting struggle because when I started this maybe over a year ago, I thought it wouldn't be that hard to identify something to acquire. And what I'm finding is any post anywhere of anything that's available, you've got honestly like 50 to 100 comments of like interested. So my challenge is, I think, a little bit different in some scenarios where it's not this plethora of choices. There's a lot of competition for acquisition and of course, identifying the correct acquisition. So that is huge. So in a year, I would hopefully to like have our first one identified and just be further in our branding would be I'm going to keep it small. So I focus.
That's great. Yeah, no, I love that. Yeah, we should definitely keep talking about that. Maybe we'll come back in a year or two and see how that journey has gone, because I agree. There's some kinds of businesses that get a lot of public attention around the acquisitions and like, the startups that raise money and, go get sold for big numbers. And then there's like kind of the local corner store businesses that are getting bought by a lot of people doing search funds and, other entrepreneurs like that. And then there's these like industry niches where like you kind of, to buy an accounting business, you almost either have to have another accounting business or like have knowledge of that space. Like it'd be hard to come in as a complete outsider, I think. And so I don't know much about those spaces because I just have never investigated them. So I'd love to dig back into that later, but I will let you go for now. Tevia, where can people follow you, find out more about you, and possibly work with you?
We're all the places, TeKodaAccounting.com. All the handles are TeKoda Accounting. We're very easy to find. Come check us out. Talk to us. We want to help you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Tevia. It's great to talk with you.
Thanks for having me, Karl.